Have you ever thought about quitting your job, starting a business, going freelance, or maybe just taking a year off to figure things out? For millions of Americans, that dream slams into a brick wall. A single terrifying question: what about my health insurance? This is the modern American condition. A feeling of being trapped, tethered to a desk not by passion or loyalty, but by a fear of getting sick without a safety net. Economists have a name for it: job lock. It's the quiet anxiety that shapes major life decisions: where we live, when we retire, whether we take a risk on a new venture. This system feels permanent, inescapable. It's so deeply woven into the fabric of American life that we assume it must have been designed this way. That somewhere, long ago, a group of policymakers decided that the best way to provide for the nation's health was through the payroll departments of its corporations. But what if that's wrong? What if this entire, life-altering system was never a plan at all? What if it was an accident? This is the story of that accident. The truth is, your health insurance is tied to your job because of a temporary, long-forgotten wartime law designed to do something else entirely. The Stabilization Act of 1942, a desperate measure to stop runaway inflation during World War II, accidentally created the modern American crisis of job lock. It forced companies to use health benefits as a clever loophole around a national wage freeze, a system that was later cemented not by a grand vision for healthcare, but by a single, consequential tax ruling from the IRS in 1954. To understand why you can't leave your job without losing your doctor, we have to go back, not to a debate about healthcare, but to a moment of global crisis. We have to trace the unintended consequences of decisions made under pressure by men who were trying to win a war. They weren't designing a healthcare system for the 21st century. They were just trying to keep the economy from exploding, and in doing so, they created the golden handcuffs that still bind us today. December 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor plunges America into a global war it cannot afford to lose. As millions of men ship out to Europe and the Pacific, a different kind of army is mobilized at home. Factories, dormant during the Great Depression, roar to life. They are the arsenal of democracy, churning out bombers, tanks, and ships at a breathtaking pace. But this unprecedented industrial mobilization created a critical problem: there weren't enough workers. This is why the crisis began. With so many men overseas, companies grew desperate. They needed welders, riveters, and engineers, and they started fighting over the limited pool of labor the only way they knew how: with money. A shipyard in California would offer a few cents more per hour, and suddenly, a factory in Ohio would lose its best mechanics. Wages began to spiral upwards. In the White House, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his economic advisors saw this as a threat just as dangerous as a German U-boat. They knew that a wage price spiral could trigger hyperinflation, a situation where money becomes worthless. It could cripple the war effort from the inside out, making it impossible to produce the weapons needed to win. FDR understood a brutal calculation. He had to control the American economy to save the world from tyranny. Because of this fear, his administration had to make a drastic choice. They couldn't let the free market run its course. They needed to slam on the brakes. The decision they made was not about healthcare, or employee benefits, or the future of American society. It was a strategic move, born of pure military necessity, to freeze the American paycheck in its tracks. And that single act would set off a chain reaction that nobody saw coming. On October 2, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Stabilization Act into law. This was his weapon. With a stroke of his pen, FDR gave himself the authority to control wages, salaries, and prices across the entire American economy. It was a calculated and drastic move, effectively outlawing pay raises for the duration of the war. To enforce this, he created the National War Labor Board, a powerful group of officials with the final say on every company's payroll. Because of this act, the central engine of the free market, the ability to pay more for something you desperately need, was shut down. Think about the impossible situation this created for a factory manager in Detroit. He's losing his best welders to a rival plant. His instinct is to offer them a dime more an hour. But now, that's illegal. The War Labor Board could fine him, or worse, seize his factory for the war effort. This is the decision that created the central paradox of the American labor market. Suddenly, businesses were forced to compete for workers without their most powerful tool. Money was off the table. For the first time, companies had to ask a new question. If you can't pay more, how do you convince someone to work for you? This created a desperate scramble for a solution. It was a problem born of pure military necessity, not economic theory. And the answer wouldn't come from the White House or from corporate boardrooms. It would come from a small, almost accidental, clarification made by the very bureaucrats tasked with enforcing the freeze. They were about to create a loophole big enough to drive a tank through. The man at the center of this storm was William H. Davis, the chairman of the National War Labor Board. Davis was a patent attorney, not an economist. He was a pragmatist, tasked with an impossible job, keeping both industry humming and inflation in check. His office was flooded with requests from desperate companies. They weren't trying to be greedy, they were trying to meet production quotas for the war. They needed a release valve. Davis and his board had to make thousands of small decisions, but one was particularly consequential. They had to define, with legal precision, what a wage actually was. Was it just the cash in a paycheck? Or did it include other things? In a 1943 ruling, the board made a fateful clarification. They decided that payments for insurance plans or pensions were not wages or salaries under the Stabilization Act. This is the moment that changed everything. The board's logic was simple. Since the money didn't go directly into a worker's pocket, it wasn't inflationary. A worker couldn't take a health insurance policy down to the corner store and buy a loaf of bread. Therefore, it didn't count as a pay raise. It was a fringe benefit. Because of this seemingly minor bureaucratic ruling, a clever loophole was born. An employer couldn't offer you another $1 an hour in cash, but they could offer you a free health insurance plan that was worth far more. For companies, it was a strategic godsend. For workers, it was a new, valuable form of compensation they had never expected. This is why, to this day, we talk about a compensation package and not just a salary. An accident of wartime price controls had just invented the modern American benefit system. This clever loophole wasn't just a theory debated by bureaucrats in Washington. Out on the West Coast, one industrialist was about to turn it into a powerhouse, proving its strategic value beyond any doubt. His name was Henry J. Kaiser. Kaiser wasn't a healthcare pioneer. He was a builder. He built dams, ships, and steel mills. For the war effort, he was tasked with building hundreds of Liberty ships at a staggering pace in his California shipyards. But he had a problem. His shipyards were in remote locations, and his workers, tens of thousands of them, were getting sick and injured. Every worker off the line was a delay the war couldn't afford. Because of the wage freeze, he couldn't just throw more money at the problem to attract an endless supply of new labor. So Kaiser made a calculated move. Working with a doctor named Sidney Garfield, he created a radical new system for his workforce, a prepaid medical plan. Think of it like a subscription. Workers paid a small amount from their paycheck, and in return, they and their families got nearly unlimited access to Kaiser-run clinics and hospitals built right near the shipyards. It was revolutionary. The results were immediate and effective. Kaiser's workforce was healthier, more productive, and more loyal. Absenteeism plummeted. This is the moment that transformed health benefits from a fringe idea into a powerful business tool. Kaiser proved that providing healthcare wasn't just a cost. It was an investment in a stable, efficient workforce. He had weaponized the War Labor Board's loophole, creating a competitive advantage that no rival could match with cash alone. The war ended. The soldiers came home, and the wage freezes melted away. Logically, the entire system of offering benefits times of wages should have vanished. Companies could now compete with cash again. But the system didn't disappear. In fact, it became more entrenched. Why? Because of this wartime accident, millions of American workers had now tasted employer-provided health security for the first time, and they weren't willing to give it up. This is where the nation's powerful labor unions enter the story. Union leaders saw what Kaiser had done. They recognized this new benefit as a massive, tangible victory they could win for their members. Something just as valuable as a pay raise. So when they sat down at the bargaining table with Ford, General Motors, and U.S. Steel, they didn't just demand higher wages, they demanded health plans. And they got them. A 1948 GM-UAW contract became the new template. This led to a domino effect across the entire economy. Because of this union pressure, a cultural expectation was forged. A good job no longer meant just a fair wage and a pension. It now meant a job that came with a health plan. What began as a temporary, accidental loophole to bypass a wartime rule had, in less than a decade, become a permanent and popular feature of the American workplace. It was no longer a clever trick, it was part of the American dream. But this new part of the American dream rested on a fragile foundation. Your health, your family's security, was now tied to your boss. What if you lost your job? What if you wanted to start your own business? This is the moment when the entire system could have pivoted. And one man saw the danger. President Harry S. Truman. Truman looked at the patchwork of new corporate health plans and saw a future of inequality. He believed that a citizen's right to health care shouldn't depend on their employer. So in 1945, he proposed something revolutionary for America. A national health insurance program. It wasn't government-run health care. It was a system where every worker would pay into a national fund, much like Social Security. That fund would then pay the doctor and hospital bills. Your health security would be tied to your citizenship, not your job. This was the great fork in the road. America could follow the path of every other major industrialized nation, or it could continue down the strange, accidental path it was already on. The choice ignited a political firestorm. The opposition was led by the American Medical Association, the powerful lobby for doctors. The AMA saw Truman's plan as a direct threat to their professional and financial independence. They feared a government bureaucrat standing between a doctor and a patient, setting rates and dictating care. Their strategy was brutally effective. They launched one of the most expensive public relations campaigns in American history, branding Truman's plan with two toxic words: socialized medicine. In the tense new climate of the Cold War, that label was a political death sentence. It linked healthcare reform with communism. And it worked. Truman's plan died in Congress, not once, but repeatedly. Because of this calculated political defeat, the road to a universal system was closed. By default, the employer-based model was now the only path forward. This is why, today, America stands alone among developed nations, the only one where a pink slip can also be a medical crisis. With Truman's national plan defeated, the employer-based system was the winner. But it was still just a popular private arrangement, a cultural expectation. It wasn't yet fused to the engine of the entire American economy. That happened next. Not with a dramatic presidential speech, but with a quiet, bureaucratic decision that would prove more consequential than any congressional vote. And here was the problem. Money is money. If your boss gives you a $1,000 bonus, you pay income tax on it. So, what about the money your employer spent on your health plan? Wasn't that just another form of compensation? For years, this was a gray area. But in 1954, the Internal Revenue Service had to make a choice. And they made a fateful one. The IRS issued a ruling that made employer-sponsored health insurance the best deal in America. The decision was simple. The money your company spends on your health benefits would not times be counted as taxable income. Think about what this means. If your company gives you $10,000 in cash to buy your own insurance, you first have to pay income and payroll taxes on it. You might only have $7,000 left to actually spend. But if your company uses that same $10,000 to buy a plan times 4 times you get the full $10,000 of value, completely tax-free. This is the moment the accidental system became permanent. The tax code was now giving a massive, hidden subsidy to employer-sponsored insurance. And only to employer-sponsored insurance. It instantly became the most financially efficient way for anyone to get coverage. The loophole born from a wartime wage freeze was no longer just a loophole. It was now an officially sanctioned, multi-billion-dollar tax break. And it made the Golden Handcuffs unbreakable. Because of that quiet IRS ruling in 1954, we now live inside a system run by a hidden engine, an invisible subsidy. It's called a tax expenditure, and it's the most powerful force in American healthcare that nobody ever talks about. Here's how it works. The government can give you money in 2 ways. It can send you a check, which is obvious and gets debated on the news. Or it can simply decide not to collect taxes it was supposed to. That's a tax expenditure. It's a subsidy that's silent and politically almost impossible to stop. Every year, The U.S. government forgoes collecting hundreds of billions of dollars in income and payroll taxes on employer-sponsored health benefits. It is the single largest tax break in the entire American tax code. Bigger than the mortgage interest deduction, bigger than tax breaks for retirement savings. It is a massive, ongoing government program to support job-based health insurance. This is the final piece of the puzzle. This is why the health plan offered at your job feels like a good deal, while buying one on your own feels financially punishing. It's not your imagination. You are comparing a heavily subsidized product with a non-subsidized one. You're using your own after-tax money to compete against your employer's untaxed dollars. You can't win that fight. So let's trace the chain of events one last time. That is, a desperate attempt to stop wartime inflation. The Stabilization Act of 1942 forced employers to freeze wages. Those employers, desperate to attract workers, used a clever loophole: health benefits. A temporary solution became a post-war expectation. And when the government had a chance to build a national system, political fighting killed it. Finally, a bureaucratic tax ruling in 1954 took this accidental creation and fused it to the tax code, creating an invisible, multi-billion-dollar subsidy that has been running our lives ever since. No one designed this. No one voted for it. It wasn't a grand plan. It was a series of panicked improvisations and unintended consequences that hardened into a system that now holds millions of us in place, afraid to quit our jobs, start a business, or retire early, all because of a temporary wage freeze in a war that ended 80 years ago. The Golden Handcuffs were forged in an emergency, but they were locked in place by the taxman. If you found this eye-opening, hit subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden causes, and leave a comment. Did you know about this historical accident before watching?